Welcome to this panel of the AML conference entitled The Past, Present, and Future of Mormon Young Adult and Middle Grade Literature. I'm Andrew Hall. I'm pinch hitting. Sharlee Glenn organized this panel, but she's caught a bug today, so she had to drop out, and so I'm pitch hitting here, but I'm with a great group, and I'm going to mostly leave it up to them, and so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Lisa, could you introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Lisa Thomson. Professionally, I am a writer for a magazine, like article magazines and websites. I've written and been on staff for a lot of different publications over the years, business, diabetes, home and renovation. I've also worked in the LDS market quite a bit. I was on staff at the Liahona and Ensign, as they once were, and worked for BYU's alumni magazine, currently called Y Magazine. And I've now currently freelance, and I've written for a lot of publications, including BYU alumni publications and LDS Living and church magazines, as well as many other not church related things. Middle grade wise, that is my favorite genre of literature. I fell in love with it as a mother, and we had a great tradition in our family, or continue to, where I read aloud to my kids every single night. And so even as they grew up and got into junior high and now they're in high school, we've read a lot of books and a lot of middle grade books, and I'm just in love with that genre. So that's kind of why I'm here. From that perspective is my love for that particular niche.
Great, thank you. Mikayla, how about you?
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm Mikayla Johnson. My pen name is Mick Johnson. I'm currently an MFA student studying creative writing at BYU with an emphasis in fiction. And I have written both middle grade and young adult novels during my graduate degree. I currently work as editor-in-chief at Wild Honey Children's Magazine, which is a brand new magazine housed at BYU and geared towards children ages 6 to 12. I previously worked as editor-in-chief at Inscape Journal, which is a literary journal from 2022 to 2024. And from 2016 to 2018, I taught third grade at Cascade Elementary in Orem, Utah. And I saw firsthand how children ages 8 and 9 interacted with middle grade fiction. And on a personal note, like Lisa, I have children. I have a 4-year-old and 6-year-old. And so as they are getting older and getting towards the middle grade category, and then after that, young adult, I'm really invested as a mother to know more about it and be informed in this field.
Thanks. Hey, Mick, is that Wild Honey? I hadn't heard of that before. So is that a print magazine they're going to do, or is it online?
Yes, it's a print magazine, and we're just starting it. We're just now getting our mission statement put together, our email. Like, we're just at the very, very basic foundation starting. It's kind of the brainchild of Chris Crow and Andy Ellis at BYU, and I'm lucky enough to be the first editor-in-chief there. So,
Oh, great. Chris Crow, who we are honoring this week as a Lifetime Achievement Award winner. So great. Okay, Cami Hancock.
Hi. So I have been with Covenant since 2015 as an editor. I started as the submissions editor part-time and then went to full-time, and now I'm the senior editor there. Before that, I worked as an assistant editor at Brief Media, which publishes veterinary journals. And I was a vet tech before that, so I kind of merged the fields there. I have a BA in English, and I've really enjoyed Covenant, and we are currently looking for LDS fiction for all ages, but particularly YA and mid-grade, because we haven't done that in a while, or much of it at least, and we would love to do more with that market.
Oh, it's going to be great to have a publisher's viewpoint from all this. Good, thank you. And Sylvan.
Hi, I'm Sylvan Turley. I don't quite have the same professional resume. I'm mostly on this panel because I happen to know the right people. But I love reading and writing, amateur novelist over here. And as a member of the target demographic for YA and middle grade novels, I think I have some audience perspectives to share on here.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. And you're an author as well, right? You've been writing your own books?
Yeah, try my best. Just recently submitted a manuscript to a publisher, so we'll see what happens.
Great. Okay. Well, let's talk about what we're going to our themes today. So again, the past, present, and future of Mormon, young adult, and middle grade literature. So now we're being very broad in our definition of what LDS or Mormon literature is. So anything written by an LDS author, whether the book deals overtly with LDS church or culture or anything like that, characters. And so that could include books published in the national market by LDS authors that could or could not have anything to do with Mormon characters, and then books published for the LDS market, which again could or could not have anything to do with LDS characters. And we'll talk about the differences between the YA books and the middle grade books and things like that. First, a little bit of historical overview. This is mostly written by Sharlee, but she says the first notable, and the previous panel on picture books did a great book on the history of picture books and LDS fiction. So definitely go look at that. And they were very organized, had a nice slideshow, which I was like, ooh, I wish I should have done that. But the first notable children's book by an LDS author was probably Virginia Sorensen's Miracles on Maple Hill, which won the 1957 Newbery Award. A great novel. Does not have LDS characters in that. Another book that she wrote for children, The House Next Door, in the 1950s was a non-LDS family moving into a town in Utah, and they're learning about the Mormons. This is during the time of polygamy, and so polygamy comes up as well. And another novel, Plain Girl, by Virginia Sorensen, about Quakers, I believe, which is a great book. So she did some wonderful stuff in the 50s, often about religious themes. Now, fiction, people have been publishing fiction in church magazines from the late 19th century. The Contributor was the kind of the young men, young women's magazine, and then the Improvement Era for most of the 20th century. Until from 1900 to 1970, and then the Improvement Era split, and the magazine for the youth was called the New Era from 1971, and from the mid 70s, Jack Wayland was an author who he's a physicist, but he started writing short stories, and he started placing short stories in the New Era in the early mid 1970s. Often very funny stories. The Phone Call, you may have seen the movie version of that, was one of his stories. And so then, lots of people were publishing, lots of people who later become well-known authors were first publishing in the New Era and The Friend, stories there in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. The church announced they would no longer publish fiction in the New Era and Friend sometime in the 2000s. So if there's ever a story type article, it has to say something like based on a true story in it. So they say, okay, no more fiction. And then now the New Era is called For the Strength of the Youth. But so that Jack Wayland published all these stories, and they're very funny, I thought. Very clever. I think I like his stories more than his novels, but I like his novels too. But his first novel, Charlie, came out in 1980, and that through Deseret Book, and that's a big bestseller. And he continued to write novels for the next 30 years or so. There through Deseret Book. So then he becomes like the star of a group of authors that are publishing in Deseret Book, and then eventually Covenant and Cedar Fort, who are writing books for young people through the 80s, 90s, and 2000. Also from the 1980s, you started having authors publishing nationally. Dean Hughes, Louise Plummer, Carol Lynch Williams, who we'll be honoring this week as well, Ann Cannon, and Kristen D. Randall. And all five of them kind of straddled the line between nationally published books and LDS publishers. They kind of did both. And really a great people to be starting out. Dean Hughes, Louise Plummer, Carol Lynch Williams, Kristen Randall, just great authors. Then in the 90s, it kind of just broke open, and tons of LDS authors were writing for the national market. So Shannon Hale became a bestseller, and she won a Newbery Award, a Newbery Honor book for what's the book called? The Princess Academy. Brandon Moll, Janet Rallison, Andy Ellis, Jessica Day George, Ali Condi, Julie Berry, Jennifer Nielsen, Rosalind Eves, Jen Zenter, and many others. So and people were like, wow, why are all these people from Utah or LDS people publishing so much? There's lots of articles in Publishers Weekly and others saying, what Publishers Weekly said, there's more recognized children's book authors per capita in Utah than in any other state in 2018. Now here at AML, we've been honoring juvenile fiction authors for quite a while. 1986, there was the first award for children's literature was given, and kind of different awards would appear over the time. Carol Lynch Williams got the first middle grade novel award in 2001. first picture book award to Rick Walton in 2002. And in the last few years, last 10 years, it's pretty been standard. There's always a picture book, middle grade novel, and young adult novel that are honored with awards every year. Okay, so let's throw this up. Well, first of all, just with the history of it, and I mentioned Jack Wayland. Lisa, I think you said you were a fan of those books. Can you tell us about that?
Well, if Sylvan's here as our current audience member, I am here as the past audience member. Definitely in junior high and high school, those were definitely the books that I loved. I mean, even though I ended up with a bachelor's and a master's in English, I can't say I was a great reader growing up. And but those were the books that, I mean, I like a good, I don't know what you would call it, cringy romance. I don't know, like, but I thought I loved those books, and those were always the ones I gravitated toward. Um, and I actually was thinking about, like, why don't we have, what happened to them? You know what I mean? What happened to the market for those? And I did note in our pre-panel discussions that I wonder if, you know, as media progressed and movies progressed and LDS movies came out, if that kind of took the place of what maybe, like, you know, teeny boppers wanted to watch, you know, maybe watching the Singles Ward or the RM or something was took the place of reading novels. But I sure loved them growing up, and I definitely think there's a market for them to be done right again.
I really like those. I read the Jack Wayland novels as well in middle school and into high school, and I must have had 7 or 8 of them on my shelves. And he's really funny, especially those early novels were very funny. But also, you know, you could say, you know, maybe you can complain about the writing style or something like that. But they were quite pleasant books to read, I thought, as a kid.
Well, and I mean, when you say cringy, I mean, that sounds derogatory. And I definitely don't mean that in a I mean, it was just sweet, kind of simple, but it was perfect for, you know, little junior high school girls. So definitely enjoyed them.
And actually, he would, you know, he took on some different interesting things. I remember, I mean, Charlie. There's this scene where, you know, Charlie finds out that oh, no, not Charlie, the boy, Sam finds out that Charlie, before she joined the church, was sexually active, and he's like, oh wow, I can't marry her anymore, and goes to the bishop and says, and the bishop says she's repented, she's doing fine. You're the one who's got a problem. He takes away his temple recommend, and it's a really interesting, you know, talking about the atonement and what that means, and you know, again, for people in the 70s and 80s, I think that was a useful discussion, and most of his books have something like that. So yeah, there's definitely value in those books. Well, we just had the previous panel. I was watching the children's books, and they had an interesting thing. I asked because they're talking about, oh, Cedar Fort, an LDS publisher, is really interested in children's books with LDS themes, and they want to publish it, especially if it's about something about the Come Follow Me theme for this year. And so then I said, oh, what about middle grade and young adult? Are they publishing anything like that? And they said, nope. They said, not interested. They said they used to publish middle grade young adult fiction, but they said, not interested. They're not selling. We don't want to. We're not going to do it. So please do not send us any fiction at all, apparently. And then also anything really directed towards youth at all, which is surprising. Which let's go ahead and maybe just shift it over to Cami. So Covenant is interested in publishing books for youth right now, but tell us about that.
Yeah, so to Lisa's point of like, why did these things go away? I think there are so many things that could contribute to that. Maybe like you said, with the media, with like these more visual video and movie stories instead of books. But I also think that other things influenced it as well. Like there was a boom in the historical romance, and people stopped writing it. People stopped submitting it, and it stopped selling well. So people weren't buying it either. To see the fourth point,
people were buying and selling romances and not books for teens.
Right. Sorry. Yes. So mid-grade YA, there wasn't as much of that being written, or and on the flip side of that coin, it wasn't being purchased in the audience either, and so the demand wasn't there. So Covenant right now, obviously that creates a need because, you know, when no one's writing it, no one's publishing it, there's not a lot out there, and that creates a need. So it's kind of a cycle that's happened. And Covenant sees that need, and we want to bring that back and serve all age groups for the Latter-day Saint market and tackling some of those difficult topics that Jack Whalen did. I remember in I think it was Emily was another one where the main character was a burn victim, and she struggled with confidence because of that. So even themes like that, I think, can be very valuable. And approaching those things from a faith-based standpoint.
Okay, thanks. Mikayla, what do you think about all this? Or just we want to take us in a different direction, that's fine too.
Oh, sure. I grew up in the generation of Shannon Hale's books becoming really big. And I remember adoring those books because they were artfully written. It was a fantasy story, but I felt that the characters, they could address difficult topics, but their values seemed so similar to mine that I felt like they were heroines I could really get behind, or heroes for there's a couple characters in the Books of Bayern series that are male. And I did not know when I initially read that book. I knew it was a New York Times bestseller, but I didn't know she was a member of the church. And as a young woman who was also writing books, to find out later, probably 2 or 3 books in that I was reading her books, that I find out that she was a member of the church, to realize that novels outside of talking about Latter-day Saint experiences could be written by Latter-day Saints gave me just this huge excitement to realize that that future could be mine as well. My brothers loved Brandon Mull's books growing up, and several other authors as I came to know that their faith aligned with mine. Just as a young writer, it gave me the encouragement to see that there's places in speculative fiction for us too. So anyway, that's my piece.
Okay, thanks.
Can I jump
so-
in there, Andrew?
Oh, yes, please. Yes.
So I totally agree with what she's saying, and I think it's made me think of something that, or what I've been thinking about a lot recently is exactly what Mikayla is saying, that there is a need always for I don't know if you want to call it values-based literature, but literature that does reflect values that are similar to ours. And I feel like it doesn't have to be specifically Latter-day Saint. It doesn't have to be specifically about members of the church, the characters or whatnot. But I agree, like with Mikayla, whether it was Shannon Hale's or, I mean, I can go down a long list of middle grade books written by lots of people in the world that, don't share my faith, but the books have the values that I want for my kids. And so I think about as a mother, and I'm constantly looking for quality stories, quality books that aren't trying to push the envelope, that aren't trying to, I'm not saying you can't talk about hard subjects or anything like that, but honestly, like it feels like in the current market, it's all about hard subjects. It's all about pushing the envelope, and it's all about bringing in a wide range of diverse voices and all of that. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's not good or valuable, but there is always a market for just good stories, good plots, characters with a growth arc where they may make mistakes, but then there's a redeeming end, or whatever it might be. And so I just think that is so valuable. And so when I see a success like Shannon Hale's or something like that, I don't think it's because she's a Latter-day Saint that she's successful. It's because that she wrote a book that resonates, and we all cheer for the characters. And there's nothing as a mother that I'm worried about my children reading in a book like that. And it's just a good, positive, good values, whatnot. So I do think there's always a market for that. And in some ways, it's harder to break in to that right now. So for Covenant to step in and try to take advantage of that need in the market, I think is fantastic. I think that if you do it right, you'll have great success with it, because there's never not a need for just good literature for kids.
Thank you. And again, we're honoring Shannon Hale this week, and we just put up a video of her discussion with a couple of scholars about her career, and it's a really interesting discussion. So I encourage everyone to read that. Sylvan, what do you think about all this discussion about LDS and reading fiction? Where do you see the connection between those two things as a reader, or anything else you want?
I gotta say, I loved what Lisa was saying about kind of reading this values-based literature. And I feel like it's really important to have literature and books and novels and like fictional stories that can share values, because people my age don't want to sit through, a sermon about the law of chastity or repentance or all these things. But the incredible thing about stories is that you can sit there and, put yourself in someone's shoes and actually like bond with characters, and it's a form of entertainment, right? I grew up on these books. You put a book in my hand and, I'm going to enjoy it and I'm going to read it. And so being able to put values into that without making it preachy, sermony, churchy, it's just a really cool opportunity that I think fiction authors have.
Is there any books recently that you've read that fit that what you're looking for?
My goodness me, I read so many books. I got to say I love Brandon Sanderson, as many people do. And I've just been noticing like redemption arcs and the kind of repentance process type stuff in a lot of his books, where you see broken characters, like real people who have lots of vulnerabilities and kind of, don't always make the best decisions, but seeing them come back from these things and embrace hope and new life and stuff. I just think that's a fundamental part of our faith.
Yeah, thank you. Brandon Sanderson is an amazing author. Um, okay, how about this? We'll throw this question out. Do you think are the current trends in middle grade and young adult publishing in the national and in the LDS markets? So Lisa mentioned there's a push for pushing the envelope and especially young adult fiction being very taking on a lot of topics that mainstream LDS people might not be comfortable with. And there's the new adult. Some books are called that are even they're supposed to be for young people but have very racy content. So that's one thing that's going on. But so you can talk more about that or any other trends that you see in the market. I throw it out to anybody who's interested.
I'd like to speak to that for a minute, Andrew, if that's okay. So some main differences, key differences between these groupings are that middle grade novels tend to focus on themes of friendship and family. They center around the main character's immediate world. They feature main characters who are ages 10 to 13. And as we've already talked about, middle grade novels are really low on profanity and do not have any graphic violence or sexual content. Young adult novels tend to focus on themes that are more like angsty teen issues and feature characters exploring the world beyond their home life, ages 14 to 18. And usually there's a lot of profanity, often graphic violence and sexual content. What I find to be interesting, and I'd love to hear if any of you have dissenting views, I don't see young adult novels as being higher in reading level or in literary ability than middle grade novels. In fact, some middle grade novels are more difficult to read for young people. And middle grade doesn't necessarily mean that only 8 to 12-year-olds will enjoy them. Usually people of lots of different ages can enjoy a well-written middle grade novel. That can be true of some young adult novels, but middle grades tend to be the ones that bridge the gap between lots of ages. I think one problematic area there, though, is that there's an age gap that is not being addressed. There's not a lot of books written about 13, 14, 15-year-old teens. And I think it's also difficult for teens that are ages 16, 17, 18 that want to read about friendship and family values and the world around them. That is not currently, at least to my knowledge, being published. It's really difficult to find books about kids those ages that match a family or friendship centered life. So those are a couple of my thoughts. I'd love to hear any of the rest of yours.
Oh,
sorry, go
thanks.
ahead.
You go first, Cami, then I'll go.
Okay. I've seen a couple of interesting articles on this kind of everything you were touching on there, Mikayla, and interestingly, one of them was talking about how Up to about a third of the mid-grade audience is actually adults. And to your other point that some of the age groups are, there's a gap not being filled. There's a hole and a need in the audience that's not being filled. And I think that part of that in recent years has been the way the pandemic has affected everything. Obviously, when we were sheltering in place and everything, and kids that were affected by that weren't even going to school other than via Zoom or whatnot. Obviously, they didn't have as much access to physical books, libraries and such. And it was interesting to see kind of how those kinds of events in society have perhaps contributed to this this being underserved and the decrease in sales that a lot of publishers in the national space have seen with mid-grade literature.
So that's very interesting. So I haven't, I've attended the Storymakers Conference, for 3 or 4 years, but not in the last maybe 2 years. And, but I always look at it when the registration comes out, and I specifically look at the, who are the agents and editors that are coming that you could, sign up for a slot to meet with. Partly because I'm, have things I might want to pitch to somebody, and partly because I'm curious about what they're looking for. And I think what we have, so 2 prongs to the situation. Like you're describing, Cami, there's not maybe as much, like the market's dropping or whatnot. And middle grade was really hot for the last couple of years. It was definitely the growth market, especially nonfiction middle grade, actually. And I haven't kept a close eye, so it sounds like maybe that's cooling off. But whereas young adult was really hot like 10 years ago. But the gap here, and it goes back to this values conversation, is what editors and agents are looking for is not necessarily what we're talking about. I just even went back last night and looked back at a few previous Storymaker conference, like the most recent ones, and just reviewed the agents that had come to that conference. And for those who don't know, Storymakers used to be called LDS Storymakers, and now it's just Storymakers, and it's a conference for writers, mostly fiction writers. And it's a great conference, and I've really enjoyed attending it. And they've broadened, because it's such a great conference, it's much more broad now, and you don't have to be LDS to be part of it or anything like that. But anyway, my point being is the what the agents, even at Storymakers, which has a strong LDS connection, they're coming to the conference looking for really specific stuff. Own voices was a big one. I haven't seen as much of that recently, but that's kind of like, if you are in a minority group or whatnot, then tell your story, which again, excellent. We need to hear those stories. But it became a situation of, and if you're not in that minority group, don't write that story. You're not allowed to write it, which is something I saw quite a bit. And so there's that delicate balance of, how do I include diversity in my book if I'm not diverse myself, so to speak. LGBTQ issues, they're asking for a lot of those for middle grade specifically, and young adult. And again, those are stories that are allowed to be told too, of course. But it almost has felt like the market, what the publishers and agents are asking for is very specific, and not always what, as a parent, I'm looking for my children. So there's a little bit of a disconnect to me. I even looked at the manuscript wish list hashtag last night just to kind of see what currently is out there. And there was like middle grade horror stories and middle grade. One woman was like, I want to look at child sexual trauma in middle grade. And I was like, I don't want my kids to read it. Like, that's not what I'm looking for as a parent, for my children. And so, to me, again, it goes back to there is a niche. There are good stories, the best stories we know and love that we can just recite off the top of our head, Where the Red Fern Grows or The Bridge to Terabithia or whatever. There are startling things in those books that are very heavy, but they're also books we adore and love. Tuck Everlasting, whatever it might be. So it's not that you can't address difficult or specific topics, but it feels like the market, like those who are in control of the market are asking for things that maybe the people who are the market share, the audience of the market are not asking for.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so one of the things that Covenant in our refocusing over this past year has done is well, okay, there's a lot of things. So being more deliberate about submissions and putting out calls for submissions. And to your point, like that sounds like, okay, we're looking for this specific thing. But again, we also like if it's LDS or if it's even got some kind of strong faith-based content, we're looking for it. So we're pretty open right now and to a wide variety of things. And there's always a range of like faith content levels. There might be just faith mentions, right? Where characters go to church and they pray and read their scriptures and things like that that are part of their lives as characters, but not necessarily a part of the story. We're looking for things that are specifically a part of the story, where the faith helps the characters through navigating life, or the faith is maybe a part of the struggle. And when we're talking about not shying away from difficult topics, that's definitely a hard balance to find with, like, we want to not just have books that aren't meaningful, right? That are shallow, but we want to strike that balance of this is going to uplift our readers. This is going to enable readers to get something out of it and relate to. We want things to be relatable. That's how we connect with the book and with the characters. Sylvan's point, like trying to connect to characters and finding a commonality that's uplifting for us in our own lives. And that is a struggle, definitely. But obviously, as an LDS publisher, there's certain content that we're not going to allow. We're not going to allow things to cross a certain line with graphic content in any way, shape, or form, whether it's violence or sexuality, or language. There are certain things like that where we've got a line to draw. Another recent development is that we have a sensitivity review team that is over at Deseret Book, and Covenant, all of its imprints use it. And this team of sensitivity reviewers helps to try to address difficult topics in a way that's going to be uplifting and not a downer, and not gonna push boundaries too much, where we don't want parents to have to worry about that kind of thing. We want all of our readers, or as many readers as possible, to feel safe reading everything we publish.
Yeah, it's good to know what they're looking for. Sylvan, you sent in this possible thing to talk about, which fits. You said, with any fiction, we have to suspend our disbelief. But with general fiction, I realize that I also sometimes have to suspend my belief. So why should or shouldn't we read LDS fiction that challenges our personal conceptions of our faith? So, do you have an answer to your own question?
Well, I don't think there are very good answers to these kinds of questions. But I do think it's really interesting because I've kind of grown up on LDS fiction, and I've branched out and I've read lots of other books from a variety of perspectives. But coming back to some of the stuff that I read when I was younger, especially the stuff that's like explicitly LDS, characters going to church and reciting scriptures and all that stuff. I've noticed that, some of their values are different from me. And it's just interesting to wrestle with that idea that there is, more than one way to live in the one true church, because we kind of have that mentality, especially in the LDS church, and kind of no matter what you believe in, that your way is the right way. And if we have the answers, then we can, just follow that path, and everyone else ought to be following that path. But it's good to engage with fiction, I think, that challenges those kind of ideas and shows a variety of paths. And so you can connect with people and form empathy with individuals who don't entirely share your life experiences.
Well, so you mentioned Brandon Sanderson. What other recent books, or any books? What are the books, LDS or not, have you enjoyed? Middle grade or young adult?
So many. I love Martine Levitt, of course. Talk about her a little bit. She's a really good LDS author. Other incredible books that I have recently read is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. And that one offers, it gives off middle grade vibes. It's kind of whimsical, fantasy, lighthearted, but it addresses a lot of deep social issues. And I feel like, kind of going back to Kemi's point of being able to uplift while also addressing hard topics is a really important thing that we need to, I don't know, that I think we ought to get involved in.
Thanks. Well, yeah, Mikayla, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just had a quick thought with that. I also love Martine Levitt, Sylvan, and I wanted to share a little about her book, Buffalo Flats. It's a YA that came out last year, historical fiction, centers on a young woman who is a member of our church, lives in Canada in the 1890s. And when I read this book, I was like, oh, finally someone that worships like me. She talks to God sitting outside and talking into the sky. And at the very beginning of the novel, she sees God sit next to her in his like overalls. And it was amazing to me to read that and think, this is my God. This is who I see. When I'm praying, I really struggle to use these and thous. I say you and yours, and I talk to him with my eyes open as though he's there with me, because that feels most natural to me in my worship. And sometimes I I enjoy reading about someone else's perspective as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But some of the books I've been picking up from Desiree Book or Siegel Book growing up, were a little more traditional, someone kneeling down or using very, our traditional prayer language, or some of the ways that they participated in the church, I admired, and I could see them and thought, I see my friends in them, but where am I in these books? And from Martine's book, even though this character lives in a very different time and space than I do, I felt so close to her. So I think maybe one of the solutions to seeing ourselves in Latter-day Saint literature is to have more Latter-day Saints write about their experience as a member of the church, and write about a fictional character or a nonfiction memoir situation that features a character that worships the way that they do. And we'll see more of the beautiful diversity that our prophets and apostles have welcomed us to be. They welcome us to be different. Though we share this, some of the same core doctrinal values, we still might worship or think differently. And what a beautiful thing it would be to have more books that explore different perspectives.
Can I just pipe in? On the flip side of that, which I think you're exactly right, Mikayla. And one thing I've seen in the publishing industry in the last several years that is a little bit lost is they talk a lot about seeing ourselves in stories. I want to see myself. I want to see the way I pray or whatever. And that is so important, to be able to read a story and relate to it. Like, you can relate to that story. You can see yourself in that story. The flip side of that is reading and storytelling is also about seeing other people's experiences. It's also about other people's learning about other people. I remember in 6th grade, we had to choose a book about some other place, and that was the unit or whatever. And there were many books offered to us, and then we had to do some project related to the book we read. And I read a book about Lebanon. I knew nothing about Lebanon in 6th grade. And actually, in 6th grade, the US Embassy in Lebanon was bombed. And so it was right as I was reading about this country of Lebanon that this very like current event was happening in our nation. And I loved that book. I wish I could remember the name of that book so I could go back and read it again, because I read about people I did not know in a culture I did not know. They were talking about fig trees. I don't have fig trees in my yard. And it was just really a beautiful book. And so I do think it comes back to me back to stories with not just values, but compelling stories about people. And it is important to see ourselves in those stories. And it's also important to see other people in those stories. And I feel like with Covenant and their and your new, emphasis on getting into LDS fiction specifically, or value-based fiction in general, you will be so successful as long as you grab those stories. Good stories is what really we're looking for. We're looking for good stories, and that is what uplifts and strengthens us. If we can learn about other people, and if we can see ourselves at the same time, I think both of those angles are important to readers.
Thank you. Rosalind Eves says in the comments, and Rosalind Eves is one of our great young adult authors. She says, I think it is possible to address hard issues in ways that are appropriate for kids, particularly for kids who have lived through those kinds of experiences. Such books can be a lifeline. And let me mention a couple of authors and books that actually have brought in these are ones I picked out that actually have brought in LDS characters, and I think are just great books, great examples of this. And I haven't read Martine Levitt's. I've read a lot of her past fiction. So I know she's a great author. I haven't read Buffalo Flats yet, but that's exciting to see that this is, again, a nationally published novel, is about an LDS girl and faith as being a big part of the book. That's great to see. So most of our YA authors who've done so well in the last 30 years, they usually don't, religion is not a major theme, but there's been a few that it has. And let me just mention a few. Louise Plummer had a book called A Dance for Three in 2000, which is about a girl in Utah. I think if I remember correctly, she's not from an active Mormon family, but she's maybe one parent was, and she has a bishop, and being in this LDS community was a very important part of the book, and it was about teenage pregnancy and the way that she was doing with that. Wonderful book, A Dance for Three by Louise Plummer. I really highly recommend that. Kristen D. Randall, who's done some very interesting things, has a novel called Slumming in 2003, which is about three Mormon kids who are probably in California, or it's not Utah, where they're a minority, but they want to do good in the community, but they're kind of what's the word? They're kind of naive about it, and they, or at least several of them are, and too much thinking that they're going to be able to change people through their example. Too optimistic perhaps. And anyways, the issues they run into is they try to become good people in society, and anyways, it's a great novel. Kristen T. Randall's Slumming. Julie Berry has done a lot of novels. None of these have had LDS characters. They're all historical, but several of them have to do with religion, particularly one called The Passion of Dolsa, Dolsa, in 2016, which is about a girl in medieval France, and based on true story, who sees visions and of God and the problems that causes in the community. Great book about religion. Jeff Zentner has done some great books about, usually set in the American South, that, again, not with Mormon characters, but there's some interesting things with religion. And then Rosalind Eves, who we just mentioned, her novel Beyond the Mapped Stars came out in 2021. It's nationally published. 1870s Utah young woman who yearns for higher education and life of science beyond her community, but also values her family and her faith. And she travels to be part of a scientific expedition to Pikes Peak to observe a solar eclipse. And there's romance and some adventure, and it's great. Highly recommend that novel. So it's exciting. I love seeing. I don't only need to see religion and faith in my novels, but it's great to once in a while to have those and have a few that come out and say, okay, talking about seeing yourself, seeing my culture, my religion, my faith represented is something I enjoy. Okay, sorry, I talked a lot. How about anybody else? Anybody has any other recommendations of recent books? Well, and again, it doesn't have to be more things. Lisa and Mikayla have been judges for us in the past of different things. Has maybe we can talk about that, or you can talk about judging these novels. What have you learned about middle grade or young adult novels through being a judge? Lisa, how about you?
Well, I've loved judging these last couple of years for the middle grade category. It's just, again, I just love middle grade. It's a pleasure to read. I mean, I just think it's and I agree with Mikayla so much that it appeals far beyond just 8 to 12-year-olds or 10 to 13-year-olds. This go around that we just completed, we noticed that there was a little bit of a we called it category creep, where the novel, like the character in the novel was 11 years old or 12 years old, but the character acted more like 15 or 16 years old. And as the mother of two 15-year-olds and one 17-year-old right now, like, I mean, I was very familiar with that age at the moment. And a recent, my kids are not long ago, 11 and 12-year-olds. And many times in those novels, I just kept thinking to myself, an 11-year-old wouldn't act like that or talk like that. And so I think that there is a little bit of that happening. And but the reason my uneducated guess as to why that's happening actually goes back to, what I've commented on earlier, that there is a need for like sort of just good quality stories, age appropriate. And the YA category feels like it's just getting more racy all the time and more, in what I would consider inappropriate. I mean, for me, again, it's just not the kind of content I read myself or want my teenage daughters or teenage son to read. Um, but there's still a yearning for good stories for that age group. And so I think what I noticed in this round of judging, all these wonderful books that, that we got to read, that it's almost like they're writing the book for the YA, but making it middle grade because that's the more popular category right now or something. I just feel like it feels to me like there's still a yearning for good quality, clean, whatever you want to call it, age appropriate material for our teenagers. And that category creep, I think, is kind of going down into the middle grade group because maybe it's easier to publish a good, clean story for middle graders or something, but yet they're writing teenagers as the characters. And so I just think that's something I've noticed in the last little bit. And many of the books that we read this time, I've already told passed on to my kids and said, you got to read this one, you got to read that one, you got to read the other. They're so good. But I do see a little bit of that. And to me, it just speaks to still a market need, that the YA market is still in need of those kinds of stories.
Okay, I mean, two of the novels in the middle grade category this year were from Shadow Mountain, or at least two of them, by the husband and wife team of Chad Morris and Shelley Brown. So they've put out. It seems like their novels are constantly being nominated or finalists for the award. What does something about their writing stand out to you? To either of you guys?
Well, I will jump in on that one. Some of their novels are some of my kids' favorites. One of my daughters in particular, and they do a great job of writing the age of the character. You just feel like you feel like it's an 11-year-old you're reading about or 12-year-old you're reading about. And the stories are always engaging. And to me, they just relate to what is happening for a kid that age at this time. So I think that they do a really good job of that. And I've read several of their books now, and they always do a very good job of the right kind of story that resonates with kids that age, and you believe the characters that they are really that age.
Mikayla, how about you and the novels you've been
Yes.
reading?
So, in relation to Chad Morris and Shelley Brown, I was enchanted by both of their novels that were published in 2023. One is The Wild Adventure of Juniper Berry. I think that's what the title is. And then the other is Virtually Me. Something that really struck me about Virtually Me was that the situation of the characters felt completely relevant to teens today. It's about tween-aged characters who are thrust into a virtual reality school in post-COVID America. And they could create avatars to represent themselves rather than being who they really are. I think that's something that so many teenagers, young adults, and children are all facing right now is this like kind of false reality that you see on social media or through video gaming, all the friends that you're making through Discord or whatever the case may be, and then who you really are. And I loved how they were able to bridge the gap between this can be really fun and it can be really harmful. How can we find a place in between? Their other story, The Wild Adventure of Juniper Berry, that takes a young lady who has been raised in the wilderness and is now thrust into the regular world, bridging the gap between some of the things we've lost with, we have such a busy world, there's so much noise and there's so much distraction, and then the complete quiet you could have living in the wilderness, yet there's these wonderful connections we can make with the modern advances that we have. So I love that Chad Morris and Shelley Brown lean into the complexity that these kids are facing of having both of these realities clashing, and that there's not a perfect answer. They really address this messiness and trying to figure it out with these kids and families with a lot of grace and love and hope. I feel so much hope from those stories rather than the depression that can sometimes set in when you're like, how do I handle all of these realities hitting me at once? So I think they really have a magical ability as a couple, as writers, to present these relevant topics to kids in a way that appeals to kids and even sounds like kids while you're reading.
Sylvan, have you read any of the books by by the couple, Chad and Shelley?
Yes, I have. I kind of have the same perspectives. I feel like they respect their middle grade audience, which, as someone who is just graduating from little kid status, I think it's really important for adult authors to recognize their audience and, understand that they can wrestle with bigger things, while also being kids. I mean, that's childish. I just read The Wild Adventure of Juniper Berry, I think it's called. And it does deal with lots of hard things, but it is from a kid's perspective, and it shows kind of the capacity of kids to make a change in their own special little sphere. And I think that's an important message for younger readers to see.
Cami, did you have any favorite books that you wanted to mention?
So I know we've been talking a lot about fiction. In the nonfiction side, I think we've got some great authors kind of keep our eyes on for that age group of mid-grade and YA. And John Fossum has got some great things coming down the line that he would like to. He feels passionately about this group as well, and I think that's going to be great. I wanted to kind of bring another perspective to this like category creep idea, and I think that part of that is that like kind of going back to the idea again of own voices. Adults are writing from a kid's perspective, and I think that there's kind of a difficulty in trying to present that authentically. When we've had, as an adult, if you've had X number of years distance from your own childhood, that's going to present some difficulties as even things like dialogue and language and slang change so much over time. And I think that it's definitely difficult to do. So just on the subject of if you're trying to write for a certain age group, I think it is very important, like Sylvan said, to know your readership and to know that age group and involve readers in your writing process who are in that age group. Get yourself a Sylvan who could give you feedback about is this authentic to that age group.
Okay, thanks. Hey, let's sneak in one question before we end from YouTube. There was a question. Could we discuss the graphic novels and comics that are designed for young adult or middle grade? I don't know, I'm not sure what the question is exactly, but is that part of your view? Let me start with Sylvan. Is there, what role do graphic novels and comics play in your overall reading diet?
Not an enormous role. However, I have experienced some pretty incredible graphic novels. Shannon Hale's Rapunzel's Revenge. Oh, changed my life. Such a good book. And I think it's really cool to kind of use that medium, just a different form of entertainment. There's lots of different forms of books that you can read. We just kind of like our narrative forms, but of the some of the ones that we were looking at this year included poetry, and also graphic novels are a part of this. And it's just cool to see that there are a lot of different mediums to tell stories.
Yeah, and then Shannon Hale's series about growing up and friendship, the best friends and real friends and friends forever, are graphic novels that she did that brought in her faith was a big part of it, and the impact that had on her. Yeah, it's interesting to see how much look at the curriculum these days. Seems like there's a lot of middle school and high school are using a lot of graphic novels. The one about Iran, whose name I'm forgetting right now, but the girl growing up in Iran, and Chinese American one that's also I see on curriculums a lot these days. Any other comments about graphic novels? Sure, Mikayla.
Yes, I just wanted to share one title. It's called Dancing at the Pity Party, a Dead Mom graphic memoir. And I read this in my young adult literature class. Andy Ellis, my professor, recommended it to me. One of the things I loved most about this book, the mother in the story passes away, as you can tell from the title. The main character is Jewish, and she talks and illustrates about her experience with Shiva, where her whole family goes inside and stays inside for a week to mourn the mother's loss. I didn't know that about Jewish culture. And I didn't know that you covered mirrors or didn't wear makeup. A lot of things that she went into detail about her Jewish faith that I never would have known without the graphic novel, and the illustrations enhanced my ability to understand what it's like to have all of your cousins and aunts and uncles all staying in the same house together for a whole week. So this is a Jewish perspective. How neat would it be to have graphic novels about what it's like to be a Latter-day Saint? What does it look like to have a mission farewell and have oodles of people that know you and all these like sprawling Jello salads and things on the table? There's so much that could be displayed about our religious and cultural experience through a graphic novel. So I'd love to see that come out someday.
Okay, thank
I would add quickly, I love that you brought up that this novel was about a Jewish family and their experience with death, because to me, that just goes right back to the foundation of what we've been talking about, is there are wonderful novels about the Jewish faith or about the Muslim faith or other Christian novels and things like that. So why can't we have Latter-day Saint novels as well that for kids, for young adults, even for adults that teach about our culture and who we are in not cringy, not trite ways, but in really beautiful and profound ways. I just feel like there really is an opportunity. And so all the writers listening, get out there and start writing.
We're waiting for you, please. All right, I think we better stop there. Thank you so much, everybody, for your thoughtful comments. Thank you for all those who have been commenting on the YouTube stream. I look forward to going back and looking at all those. All right, everybody have a good night.